Here's a wild story I've been looking into. Weed isn't even federally legal yet, but giant corporations are already ruining it. For consumers, for workers, and for everyone, really. Trulieve, the largest cannabis company in America, controls over 50% of the legal cannabis market in some states. If you combine them with their two biggest competitors in Florida, for example, they sold enough weed in 2022 to give every Floridian 7 joints.
You are basically taking over the Southeast. Is there any type of goal there?
Yeah, that's it.
You could be using their products without even knowing it. They create brands that evoke small brands and pair up with our most trustworthy celebrities, like Wiz Khalifa and whoever these guys are. Trulieve built an empire by exploiting policy mistakes in legalization, using their power to create those mistakes, and taking advantage of well-meaning programs. For example, the giant publicly traded corporation somehow got the only minority-owned license for a dispensary in Alabama. And they're already working to do the same tricks they did in states federally.
Do you have a lot of lobbyists in Washington right now, Kim?
Yes, we do.
The Trulieve story shows us what we can learn about how a weed economy shouldn't be run, and how a good one could be run. This is The Classroom from More Perfect Union, and today we're talking about how to stop big industry from bogarting our weed economy. Let's go back to the last time America decided to make a substance illegal and then change its mind. The repeal of Prohibition. Incredibly influential businessmen like John D. Rockefeller had once supported Prohibition, but when they saw it simply wasn't working, they moved to end it. Rockefeller specifically took a surprising stance for one of the most bloodthirsty capitalists of all time. He wrote, quote, "Only as the profit motive is eliminated is there any hope of controlling the liquor traffic in the interests of a decent society." And that's coming from a dude who really understands profit motive. Back in the 30s, the United States government took antitrust, that's preventing monopolies, far more seriously than it does today. So in an attempt to keep the alcohol industry from becoming monopolized, they implemented a tier system. No one company could be the manufacturer, distributor, and retailer of alcohol products. Now, giant alcohol companies are a problem today, but the problem could have been way worse without that regulation. But let's look at weed. Zooming in on Florida's first legalization initiative and the dawn of Trulieve. In 2014, the Florida state legislature was building out a bill to legalize certain low THC strains of cannabis for medical uses.
The bill wasn't written by a progressive cannabis advocate like you might think,
but by Matt Gaetz, then a member of the Florida House of Representatives. Yeah, that guy. It was boosted by strong supporter Representative Halsey Beshears. Medical cannabis laws are complicated because they basically have to create an entire industry and how it runs from scratch. There need to be regulations on everything from labels to who can get licenses. During the debates on the bill, an amendment was added by Representative Matt Caldwell that said in order to get a license to grow the newly legal cannabis, a nursery must already have approval to grow 400,000 plants and have operated as a registered nursery in this state for at least 30 continuous years. 30 years. The amendment also added requirements for pre-existing real estate ownership and capital, requiring wannabe licensees to give the government $5 million in cash as assurance they could run the business. Who could possibly meet all of those qualifications? Well, there was Simpson Nurseries, the oldest nursery in Florida, opened in 1902. Simpson Nurseries was the family company of the Beshears. Yeah, that guy, the representative from earlier. To fully meet the qualifications, Simpson entered a partnership with Hackney Nurseries, also run by the Beshear family. The combined partnership got one of the just 5 licenses that Florida gave out after that bill. The combined company was Trulieve. But wait, there's no evidence of corruption here, right? Beshears being involved isn't enough. Where would he have even gotten the idea for this? His family was supposedly, quote, opposed to growing cannabis. Well, like so many great scandals, there was a total idiot involved. In 2016, a Florida businessman, J.T. Burnett, was being investigated for a number of crimes, and undercover FBI agents recorded a conversation with him. He bragged to the FBI agents that he had, quote, worked through the bill with Beshears, a childhood friend of his, over the course of one afternoon, and convinced him to push little tweaks to the bill. Those little tweaks were the amendment that broke the whole cannabis law, the one we just told you about. At the time, Burnett had a girlfriend, Kim Rivers. Today, they're married, and Rivers is the CEO of Trulieve.
Do you have a lot of lobbyists in Washington right now, Kim?
Yes, we do.
Burnett and Rivers don't come from backgrounds in cannabis, healthcare, criminal justice, or even retail, but rather finance, including Inkbridge LLC, a firm notorious for using government funding for private ventures. It's also invested in Trulieve. Burnett and Rivers were also involved in real estate and construction, and used their own companies to build Trulieve properties. Florida's first cannabis law and its largest cannabis business, Trulieve, were built on corrupt, pro-business, anti-worker, anti-consumer, anti-competitive practices by people with only their own interest in mind. But this is by no means limited to Florida or limited to Trulieve.
The lobbying for federal legalization currently is dominated by large cannabis companies and large alcohol and tobacco companies. And Amazon has endorsed federal legalization as well. What's really important to notice is that their job is easy because they want a corporate free-for-all. So all they have to ask for is legalization and nothing else.
This is Shalene Title, a drug policy advocate who's been instrumental in passing equitable cannabis laws.
She was also a commissioner for the Massachusetts Cannabis Commission, the body formed to regulate cannabis when that state legalized.
So when I served as a regulator, I was lobbied. Lobbying is something that anybody can do, but it tends to be the larger corporations that have the ability to really closely follow this regulation-making process and then to come to the regulators with exact language.
And the industry is taking notes from alcohol and tobacco lobbyists.
They have front groups like patients or consumers or workers claiming to represent their own interests, but in fact, they are representing the corporations.
But back to Trulieve. They had a little problem. In other states, the licensing structure had also been perverted by people like them, meaning it was very hard for new businesses to move in. But they had something those other businesses didn't: capital and power. So they just started buying existing businesses and their licenses in other states. This strategy is deadly for small businesses because licenses are in such small supply. By 2021, they were operating in 5 states through a series of acquisitions and made their biggest purchase yet, Harvest Health, which gave them 6 more states. It also allows Trulieve to continue vertical integration. That's where they own every part of the process from production to retail. The very same thing that regulators in the 1930s knew would monopolize the alcohol industry. Trulieve's size also puts them in a position of power over their workers, who they've union busted multiple times, all while workers are dying in their facilities. 27-year-old Trulieve worker Lorna McMurray died from what the CDC ruled to be occupational asthma due to poor ventilation in the plant. Trulieve denied all responsibility and just went harder on union busting. Because cannabis is such a young business, we as a nation haven't decided how it'll be run yet. This isn't oil, this isn't pharmaceuticals, this isn't tobacco or alcohol or railroads, any of the other exploitative businesses that have plagued America for decades. This is something new.
New York has been a great example of a state that has learned lessons from every other state. First, they focused on social equity, which means that they gave the first licenses to nonprofits and to people who had been harmed by the war on drugs. But then the second thing that they did was they enforced anti-monopoly provisions. So in New York, you can't control the entire supply chain.
New York also has pro-labor provisions, like mandatory labor peace agreements for acquiring licensure.
Because New York has put the most effective rules in place, they've also got, in my observation, the most pushback. A whole campaign really to represent the New York agency as irresponsible when in fact it has taken these really effective measures.
And even the most well-meaning regulations can be exploited by corporate cannabis. Like I said earlier, the only minority-owned license in Alabama went to Trulieve. So that tells us what we should look for if the United States ever outright legalizes cannabis. But let's get back to reality. President Biden might reclassify cannabis soon.
I'm asking the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Attorney General to initiate a process to review how marijuana is scheduled under federal law.
That means moving it down from Schedule 1, where it sits with cocaine and heroin, down to Schedule 3. But while rescheduling cannabis might get Biden a quick win in the polls, it really doesn't do anything, and could give big cannabis business even more power.
It's a step in the wrong direction, in my opinion. Schedule 3 would only protect products that have been approved by the FDA. So that's a process that could take about 10 years, millions of dollars.
And only the biggest companies can do that. The big guys also have resources and motive to use that preferred legal status to shut down the little guys who couldn't afford to get FDA approval.
But here's the thing. We just spent all this time talking about giant weed conglomerates, and they might not even be the real problem here.
So I have likened this to dinosaurs squabbling when the asteroid is coming. Right now we have cannabis businesses of all different sizes. They're competing to see who can do the best in the cannabis market. But there's this asteroid, which is the enormous companies. For example, Altria. Altria's market cap is bigger than the entire cannabis industry combined.
And it goes even bigger. Amazon has been supporting federal cannabis legislation. And I highly doubt it's because their shareholders just really want to stop people from getting needlessly arrested. And our friends at Trulieve have been focusing on federal legalization too.
Just legalization is essentially handing a monopoly to these companies. If you care about public health, about racial equity, about workers' rights, you have to ask for all of these things to be incorporated into legalization. Because in the end, if we end up just having 2 or 3 companies that are making all of the profits from marijuana and perhaps lying to consumers and exploiting workers and the environment, then I'm not sure that we even made an improvement.
Thank you so much for watching The Classroom for More Perfect Union. And if you want to support more work like this, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It actually really helps.